Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the lovely podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I am your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 39. And today we're going to take a look at Office and Professional Employees International Union. But first of all, let me give a big shout out to some of my listeners here. You guys are awesome. Let me go to my screen. See here, that is going to be Texas, Oklahoma, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. There was a previous episode where I saw someone from, well, not the particular person, but I saw there is a listener from Nevada. So this is growing in Nevada and Oregon, so that's wonderful as well. So thank you so much for joining in on this podcast. That's wonderful. So let's go ahead and get started on this puppy here. So some of the basics, it was founded in 1945. They are headquartered in New York, New York. They have locations in the United States and Canada. As of 2021, they have 88,000 members. Their key people are Richard Lanigan, he's president, and Mary Mahoney, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, my apologies. She is the secretary-treasurer. This union has affiliations with the AFL-CIO and the CLC. It says here, the Office and Professional Employees International Union, OPEIU, is a trade union in the United States and Canada, representing approximately 88,000 white-collar working people in the public and private sector. It has members in all 50 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and Canada. Says here, clerical unions began forming in the early 1900s. By 1920, the American Federation of Labor, AFL, had issued charters to more than 50 clerical unions. In 1942, the locals branded together to form the International Council of Office Employee Unions. In 1945, this union received a charter from the AFL as the Office Employees International Union. In 2010, the Association of Minor League Umpires, the national labor union that represents minor league baseball umpires, voted to join OPEIU. I kind of don't know why they would do that because they're not clerical. So I'm not really sure why they would do that or why that would be allowed. I think it's kind of odd, but that's just from my perception on that. The next part is about Canada. This is kind of interesting. It says Canadian members made up nearly a quarter of the union as early as the 1970s, but in 2003, the OPEIU chose not to appoint a Canadian to the position of Secretary-Treasurer, the second highest union rank. In March 2004, OPEIU President Michael Goodwin concluded that the American locals of the union had subsidized the Canadian locals by approximately $10 million. That's what got my attention. Because we had spoken about this in previous podcasts where I'm okay with unions, but if they're going to have unions or locals in other countries, it really concerned me that the unions in the United States, even though they may be part of an international union, my concern was that we might be utilized as someone else's personal piggy bank. And that's what it looks like happened here, and that's very unfortunate because you're talking about $10 million. And so that was back in 2004. So just think about the inflation since then. So that's why I think that if you are going to have a union, it needs to remain local within your city, your community, your state, and within your country. Big time. Because that, to me, is kind of misappropriation of funds. I don't like stuff like that happening. So that bugs me. It goes on to say, Goodwin proposed raising the per capita dues of Canadian OPEIU members by $2 per member per month, which, accounting for the then low Canadian dollar, would mean Canadians were paying more in dues than their American counterparts. Well, that's a currency issue, is what that is. So, me personally, I don't really care about their little issue with that. Because the thing is, Americans are paying more in, basically, than others. It doesn't matter about the currency in this particular example. Usually I do very much care about currency, but unfortunately, the Canadian side of this union was using and abusing funds from the American side in this union. So good for this guy, this president, for spotting that in this union. And he was trying to alleviate that. He was trying to correct it. So basically what Canada was doing is they were basically trying to have their cake and eat it too, and just thought that they could piggyback on American members and their membership dues in the United States. Can't do that. That's not right. It's allowed and tolerated, but I don't agree with it. But here we see that the president of this union basically called them out on it, but did it in a professional manner and just wanted the Canadians to pitch in more. This kind of reminds me, this is a side note, this reminds me of when Trump was president, and I think he was calling out NATO, if I remember correctly, because we are part of that organization as a country, as a nation. And unfortunately, whenever the United States gets involved with organizations that try to bring other countries and other nations together, other countries don't pay their bills, basically. So what was happening was the United States was fitting the bill, basically, for all these supplies, military personnel, weaponry going into fight, and not very many of these other countries were paying in their dues, so to speak. And I don't mean they're in a union, because they're not, but they were not paying their fair share. And so you had all these smaller countries, especially within Europe, that are socialist, fascist, they're borderline communist, they're not as bad as China and some other places I can think of, but these smaller countries, they, how do I word this correctly? Well, the first thing that came to mind is they're users and abusers, especially when it comes to monies. I don't mean that they're hostile or aggressive in terms of physical beatings and things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in terms of monies. Because I understand that there are a lot of other nations on this planet that are not as large as the United States. They don't have the same population. They don't have the same military. They don't have the same economy. They don't have the same currency. However, that's not an excuse to expect someone else who has more to cover your tab. However, when you joined an organization stating that you would help out with these things, and I kind of have to call some of these other countries out on this, especially within Europe and especially within the Soviet bloc, is what they called it back in the day. The countries that are along that line in terms of that. And so I have to call them out on it, and here's why. I was working in retail years ago, and I met a guy who was shopping there with his fiancée or wife. I think she was a fiancée. He was super hot. He was Greek. His wife, super hideous, just absolutely ugly. I couldn't believe that he would actually get engaged to someone that was that ugly. Like, even the staff in the store was like, he's engaged to her. I mean, we were polite and kind to these people because he brought his family here from Greece around Christmas time, and they were shopping when Dillard's, because I used to work at Dillard's years ago, when they were having a huge sale. And so this guy came in, and at first we didn't understand why this ugly chick was bothering this guy, because I'm not kidding you folks, this man was super hot. He almost looked Persian. Well, he had on a very interesting jacket, and so I asked him about it, and I noticed it was a military type jacket. It had a military type symbol, but it wasn't like a uniform, so I could spot that he was not from the United States. He was from another country. He was in the military of whatever country he was from, and it looked like he was in their Air Force. So I asked him about it. I said, "Oh, are you in a military branch, or where are you from?" Those kind of questions, just making conversation as I'm helping him. And he was in the Greek Air Force, and he was a pilot for them. And here's the thing. I was so ignorant back then that I'm probably still ignorant today on so many things, but it's one of those things when you're way younger and you're meeting the public kind of for the first time, you learn a lot about other cultures and societies, because the thing about the United States, sometimes we are still kind of at our bubble, especially here in the central part of the United States. basically in Tornado Alley, which is where I live in Oklahoma, we're kind of ignorant. You know, I admit that up front, especially in the Bible Belt. We can be very ignorant on so many things, and I think that's very unfortunate. So that's why I was asking him about this. And at that time, I didn't know that Greece had a military. I had no idea because they're so small, and in terms of their economy and what they bring to the world, it's kind of insignificant in terms of currency, in terms of providing a product. And I don't mean insignificant in a degrading way, but if I'm looking at dollars to value and dollars to services and dollars to product and GDP and things like that, their economy is nothing to really promote. It's nothing really to be impressed with. I think the number one reason why Greece is still around is because of tourism. Other than that, they're not really known for coming out with medical inventions. They're not known for coming out with new drugs. They're not known for their health care. It's not great. They're not known for being prosperous. If anything, Greece is known for bankruptcy, high debt, lots of people that don't want to work, don't think they should have to work a full-time job. They basically want to work part-time but get paid full-time. That's been a problem in Greece for a long time. Nobody wants to say it. Nobody wants to acknowledge it, but that's just how it is. They have such a laid-back lifestyle that they are creating huge problems within their, well, they're creating inflation, but they're creating a lot of problems within their currency and within their market. And so that affects everything. So I knew all that beforehand, before meeting this guy, because I mean, I took classes on different history and things like that, and I would go the extra mile and look up, and I really liked to understand other countries' economies, and no other country's economy compares to the United States. We are tremendously wealthy, and we're number one for a reason. And that's not pompousness, that's not arrogance. Look at the numbers and the facts. So when this guy said that he was in their military, I didn't know that, first of all, they had a military. I kind of figured they might have, but it probably would be weak because they're not known for being good fighters, per se. And so I had no idea that they had an Air Force. And so I was very surprised by that. So I learned something with that. And then the other thing that was interesting was that there was this hideous chick hanging around him all the time. And I mean ugly. And so the other ladies, like, we were just kind of looking at him like it was odd. They were so mismatched. It was bizarre. And her behavior was so weird. Like, she was all over this guy. But it wasn't like he was extremely affectionate towards her. It was kind of weird. And sometimes we would see strange things like that, and we would kind of have to alert security. If ever there was a customer hitting on someone, or if ever there's a customer behaving really weird, like kind of in a, I don't know how to describe this, in a bizarre, antisocial, or just kind of, just a bizarre behavior. Like, that's how weird this woman was. Then we find out it's his fiance, because his parents walked up. So this hot guy is engaged and is getting married to this hideous American chick. I thought, of all women to marry from the United States, he marries this woman? It was weird. Just bizarro. So it's one of those things that you learn a lot just by observing, right? And then you get to know people. And here's the thing. I'm pretty sure he was just using her for citizenship in the United States. And I just thought, man, when they have sex, there are going to be some hideous kids coming out of that marriage. I mean, I know he was hot, but I think sometimes when you marry really ugly people, and I say this as nicely as possible, I mean, he is really throwing away his genetic gene pool by marrying this chick. It was very disappointing. I'm like, he couldn't find someone better looking than that. I was really shocked. But anyway, his family was really nice. His parents were great. He was really nice. The chick, weird, really weird. But anyway, they left, and the older women that I worked with they were just in shock. They were just saying, "Can you believe that?" It was so weird. They're like, "We've worked here for this many years. We have never seen something like that. Never." because they were so mismatched, this couple. I was like, well, more than likely he's using her for citizenship, and, who knows? He might marry her, have sex with her, but he's not in love with her, obviously, and he'll probably just divorce her after a certain amount of time so he can just get his citizenship, which if I had to guess, he's using her for citizenship because his country is poor, our resources are better, and our military is better. So I was like, okay, he's kind of crafty. He was nice, but it was like ulterior motive, because when something doesn't make sense and it's mismatched, I kind of have a red flag that goes up in my head. But anyway, my point is this, side note on that. When Trump was president, he was calling out NATO and all these other countries that were part of NATO that were not paying their fair share. What they were doing was they were just joining in, saying, oh, yes, we care. We want to fight terrorism. We want to do what's right. We want to help other people. They have all these stupid causes, right? But yet they were just expecting the U.S. to provide the money, the funds, the military personnel. So basically putting our men and women in danger, putting them on the line of fire, and then also using our tanks, our equipment, our machinery, our ammunition, our technology. And you have to be careful who you invite in to agreements like that, because they see everything. Like, I just really get cautious with that, because you know what? If these other countries were successful at defeating terrorism and fighting wars, they would be number one. And the United States wouldn't have to join NATO or these other organizations and form these pacts or whatever. But here's the thing, these countries, they're poorly managed, they're mismanaged, and they basically just use us for money. And so this goes back to this union here, where you have the Canadian side of this union basically pulling a fast one with the American side of this union. And I'm just surprised that it got up to $10 million worth. I think that should have been stopped at $1 million. For sure, or even 500,000, and then, just pump the brake on this and say, hey, we're grateful that you're a part of our union, but you need to start paying up, because it's not right to have somebody else paying your bill and your responsibilities all the time. It's not right. It's kind of the difference between having a hard worker and a lazy worker at a job. The lazy worker still wants the job. They want the pay, but they don't want to do the work. So then the actual worker, the one that's doing all the work, they're doing all the work and they're getting paid, but they're not getting paid for the work that they're doing, that the slacker is doing. So to me, that's misappropriation of funds, because you get what you pay for. And if someone's doing all the work, almost like overtime kind of issue, the person that's doing the work should get that pay. Not the slacker, not the slothful individual, but the person who's actually doing the work. So that's just my personal opinion, but I think it's universal in terms of you need to pay people appropriately, and when someone is a part of an organization, they need to pay their fair share, otherwise it's not fair and you have inequality. So, because I think there are times that when other countries join American organizations or groups, just so they can use us for money, like they claim that they care about people and, it's a society issue, it's a human issue, and we're going to be part of your cause. They will use any line to fool Americans, especially when they say, oh, we want to be inclusive and we want to help you with this. Really? Well, pay up. Put your money where your mouth is how I would do it. Because I don't like being used for money. I don't like my country being used for money. And even though I'm not a huge fan of unions per se, they should not be used as someone else's personal slush fund. That's wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. I cannot say that enough. So it's one of those things. I think you should be treated. I think we should treat people how we want to be treated. And I don't think these. Let me put it this way: if Canada was on the hook and we weren't paying our fair share, that would get in the news. That's the thing. Like, we would have heard about this, because they would have been like, oh, those lazy Americans, they make all this money, and then they don't pay their fair share. However, when a socialist country doesn't pay their fair share, it's just kind of, it's not taken seriously. They're not called out on it. It's like, if the United States can get called out on the carpet for different things, then so should these other countries and their organizations. Because we want to be fair, right? Like we want to call a spade a spade. Unfortunately, sometimes when you're dealing, I don't know why, but sometimes whenever the United States is dealing with these other countries, it's like they're looking at things through rose-tinted glasses. Oh, we have locations in Canada. Or let's say, for example, with NATO or these other groups, we get to work with the Greeks, the Italians, the French. It's kind of like, oh, look at us. We're Americans and we have friends in all these other countries. I'm like, really? Well, it's basically a paid friendship in terms of that, and you're basically paying millions, if not billions of dollars to just try and get these people to agree with you and to like you. And guess what? They will never truly agree with you, and they will never truly like you. Because when you're dealing with money like that, they're just using you for money. Because here's the thing. If all these other countries that are a part of these organizations did not need money, they probably would not be trying to join all these American associations or organizations. Because they would be self-sustainable. But unfortunately, there are a lot of European countries, as well as Canada and some other countries, that they just don't have the funds. They're like some wimpy, whiny little kid throwing a hissy fit in a Toys R Us. I want everything on aisle 7. Well, guess what? You can have it if you can afford it. So what does the wimpy, whiny kid do? He tries to make friends with the rich kid at school. And says, oh, can I come over to your house and play with your stuff? Can I borrow this? And the next thing you know, that wimpy, whiny, selfish, glutton kid is now asking the rich kid for money and says, oh, well, your parents don't need to know. It's just a couple dollars here and there. That's a perfect example of what these other countries are doing to the United States. Not just within union organizations or labor unions, but in pretty much everything else. Americans in our country are basically just looked at as other people's personal piggy bank. And that irritates me because American dollars belong to America first. Like those are our wages, those are our tax dollars, those are our membership dues. That's our currency. It doesn't belong to anybody else. It belongs to the United States. And that's why it's so important that we never join the EU. Because if we already have a problem with other countries using and abusing the United States on a monetary platform, just imagine how bad it would be if we ever join the EU. Then you've got all these countries that are in tremendous debt. Greece, Portugal, Spain, France, I don't think they're bankrupt, but they're socialist. They could easily become bankrupt. Italy has been poor for a long time. You just go there and see it. But if you're just looking at it from rose-tinted glasses as a jet setter or as a tourist, then you're not going to see what's actually going on there. Stop looking for postcards and T-shirts. Actually look at what's going on in their country. And you need to look behind the curtain, so to speak, to see what's really going on. But if ever the United States joins the EU or some of these other organizations that we are already a part of, like NATO and some of these others I'll have to look up, these other people from other countries, they don't really care about us, and they hardly ever like us. And I'll give an example. Whenever we had international students come over to Oklahoma from other countries and attend our high schools, they were almost always stuck-up snobs, ungrateful. It's like they hated Americans. Now, college was different. The international students I met there were awesome. They were kind. They were a hoot. They were just way nicer. Way better people, really genuine. But the ones that I met in high school could care less whether we lived or died. They were using us for money. They just want to come over here and do whatever they want, basically. And because they were from another country, if it was a girl, oh my gosh, the guys at our high school would just go crazy over this woman. I'm like, okay, the only reason why you're sexually attracted to her is because she has an accent and she's from another country. She's actually not that cute. It was the same thing if a guy came over here. There's this one guy we had at our school. He was from Germany at our high school. He was so hideous. He was mean. He looked at us with contempt. And most German people are not like that, but at least the ones I've met as an adult. But this guy, he was horrible. He was hateful. I'm like, man, he doesn't make Germany look very good. And we were currently studying World War II about Nazis. I'm like, well, I can see why Germans would have made really good Nazis back then. Because like his attitude, the way he walked down the hallways of our high school, it was like we were garbage or trash compared to him. And there were some kids that would pick up on it, but most of the other high schoolers were like, oh, isn't it neat that he's here? And the girls were just flaunting over him. I'm like, he is so hideous and so ugly. Like, if you're going to date someone from another country, date a model. Like, he was so ugly, folks. He was, just grotesque. I was like, man, he does not look good for Germany. If it was me, I personally would not want him to tell people what country he's from, because your first impression of him is not very good, and he was just hideous. But anyway, my point is this: Americans, we tend to be very overly impressed with people that are from other countries, and I'll give an example of this. Like, for example, the girls that are, or women, whatever the age may be, the fans of, I think his name is Tom Hiddleston. It's either Hiddleston or Huddleston. I can't remember if it's an I or a U that's in his last name. But there are so many women that just drool over him because he's from Britain, he's an actor. Is he good looking? Yes. Is he the hottest guy I've ever seen? No. Not by any means. I've seen some really hot men over the years. He's not the hottest. Would I be impressed if he asked me out? I mean, I might go, might not. But it's because, I'm not just drooling over him. Like, the reason why he has all these fans is because he's from Britain, and he has an accent. He has a wonderful voice. He has a very good accent. I was going to say kind, but, because I do think he has a good, kind accent, and I'll tell you why. There are some British people that I've met are just so snarky and so rude, so hateful. And I don't know why, but whenever I meet mean British people, my brain memorizes their accent. So when I hear that accent of like a mean British person, it reminds me of the person that was not very nice. What I like about Tom Hiddleston's accent, and I apologize, Tom, if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but what I like about his accent is that it's calming. It's I don't know, it's warm and it's welcoming. That's what I mean by it's kind. And, I watched an interview of him, I think it was on, is it Jimmy Kimmel's show, I think, where Mr. Kimmel was asking him about his schooling. And I guess it wasn't commonly known that, Tom went to, I think Tom or Tim. I'm going to look that up because I feel bad. It is Tom Hiddleston. Okay, I looked you up. Okay, I apologize. It's like if I haven't met someone and if I don't know a whole lot about them, it's like my brain doesn't remember their name, and it could be like that if you were my next door neighbor. Like, let me say this: the way that I remember people is if they have a scar, or if they have an interesting story, or and also what kind of pets do they have? Do they have a dog or a cat? I remember things specifically like that, or if ever, they tell me something interesting, like they had a very difficult lawsuit or a legal battle, and they won or they lost, and why did they win, why did they lose? Like, if it's something like that, it helps me to remember it, but otherwise, it's just, my brain will not remember it because I have other things to do in my life. But anyway, in this interview with Tom and Jimmy, Jimmy asked him about his kind of his upbringing a little bit, because I guess it wasn't commonly known that he attended a boarding school. And Mr. Kimmel was very correct when he said that, here in the United States, when you go to a boarding school, it's because you are a really bad kid. Your parents are sending you to a boarding school, more than likely a military type boarding school, because you've been kicked out of other schools. What's interesting is that boarding schools are more common in the UK, in the United Kingdom, but it's not because you were a bad child. It's actually a way of having a better education. Like over in Britain, if you send your child to a boarding school, it's actually a really good thing because it's a stepping stone towards getting into better colleges, and you have a better chance of having a better career because the knowledge that you're learning is a higher level of learning than just regular schools in your village or city, so to speak. So I found that really interesting because I don't think that's common knowledge. But my point is this. There are a lot of American women that just drool over Tom Hiddleston because he's British, he's been to a boarding school, he's been in these movies, these really popular movies, and I think fans are kind of, I was going to say stupid. I think they're fickle and stupid, is what I think. And here's why. And that's really blunt, but I've been trying to buffer my speech, but it's like I just need to say what I think because it's my podcast. I'll say and do what I want as long as it's legal and moral. But here's the thing. I think his fans are stupid and very ignorant because here's the thing. The only reason why a lot of these women are drooling over him is because they are sexually attracted to him, but they're not really looking at his work, his career. And here's how you know that. They only really know about him because he's been in these popular movies that made millions of dollars. But he also does plays. He also does other type of work. That's not a big movie. It may not be a big hit. It wasn't a dud, but he has other skills within his acting. What's interesting about his fans, they don't really know that. And if they do, I don't think they really understand what it means to be an actor. I don't think they understand the training because it's actually really hard. It is really hard. But unfortunately, when you have fans that just drool over someone like this, it's just sexual attraction. That's all it is. It's not because they actually value their work. But unfortunately, sex sells in the entertainment industry. I don't like that. Like whenever I learn about an actor or an actress, I like to hear about the things that nobody else knows about their work. You know, what are some local shows that they did? You know, were they in a European film? Like, for example, there are films that, I call them BBC films, but there are a lot of really good films that we don't get here in Oklahoma because we're not considered Los Angeles or New York, and I'm not offended by that because we're really not, but I love it when we get these international films because you get to see a different side of the actor or actress that you've never seen before. It's not all about the big hits or millions of dollars. You get to see their raw talent in a way that you've never seen before, and you see how much work really goes into that profession. I think that if someone is a true fan and really respects, you know, actors and actresses, then they wouldn't just focus on the multi-million-dollar films. They would focus on their other works of art because acting is an art. You know, I look at it this way. You know, let's say you have a famous artist, you know, that does paintings. If I was a famous artist, I would get so irritated. I was going to use a different word. I would get so irritated with people if all they ever did was remember me for one or two paintings I did because it was popular at the time. But yet they are not acknowledging, they're not appreciative, or they're neglecting my other work that is just as important as the stuff that was popular or trendy. That would really bug me because, see, here's the thing. That's where you learn about what people actually appreciate about you and what they love or dislike about you. Notice I said love and not hate. Love or dislike. It's okay to like, or it's okay to dislike something. It's not okay to hate something. I think that's kind of extreme. But anyway, it's one of those things that you need to be appreciative of things. Because if you don't appreciate the person as a whole, then you're cherry picking what you like and you're just making that image a very selfish image within your head, your heart, and your soul, and you are not acknowledging that person as an entire person. You're just picking apart different parts of them and their life, and that's wrong. Like, to me, that's disgusting to do that. And it's selfish. And it's technically a form of lust, is technically what it is. It may not always be sexual, but there's a way that if you don't acknowledge someone for who they are as a complete person, then you don't really love them. And I don't mean in love as in like sexual or, flirty or things like that. I mean, like when you really love somebody as a human being, just out of goodness and kindness and out of the respect of your heart. Because love is not just about sex and flirting and kissing and things like that. There are so many different forms of love, and it's those other forms of love that are more important than the physical part, because if you don't have those other forms of love, then that physical part of love, you have just degraded it and made it worthless, and it was never meant to be degraded or worthless. Does that make sense? I know that's kind of an intense statement, but it's just, I can't stand it when people just live in a fantasy and they just pick apart other people and just only want to acknowledge what they want to acknowledge. That's a very selfish way of looking at somebody, because we were not, I'm a Christian, so I know that when we're not born as just a piece. We're born as a complete individual. Soul, body, mind, heart, soul, all of it. We are, basically, each and every single one of us is a complete package when we're born. So if someone is born, even if they're in the womb, they are still the complete package. That actually is a baby, and you shouldn't kill it. But if we are all the complete package, which we are, then to just cherry pick what you like is like going through a cafeteria and just picking the things you want and discarding the rest. Well, if you discard the rest or don't acknowledge the rest of that person, you've basically just thrown them away like a piece of garbage or trash. And it doesn't matter whether it's an actor, an actress, or your coworker, or someone that you meet at a gas station and you refuse to be kind to them. It matters how we treat people and how we view people, and not to use them or abuse them. And you're probably wondering, where is this woman going with this? Well, that behavior of just kind of living in fantasy world is exactly what I'm talking about here within this union. But it's on the flip side. The Canadians are living in this fantasy world, and they're using Americans for money. They don't even view us as really successful per se. They just want our money. Well, that's socialist, that's communist, that's fascist. Basically, all the things that are completely the direct opposite of fair trade, free trade, capitalism, democracy, freedom. Really take notice of those things, because it's subtle. It's not always obvious. Even though this article is not very long, and we just touched on just a little piece, where it was talking about this president was basically calling out the Canadian side, saying, hey, you've basically got $10 million worth of our membership dues. So, if you're not paying that, then we've got a problem. That's basically like a selfish relative that thinks your inheritance should go to them. And that's not how inheritance works. But I'm just giving an analogy. But just know that I think that kind of fantasy world is a problem on both sides. And the way to rectify that, the way to make it better, and to just, I would say, just live in Realville. That's what I tell people. Well, I live in Realville, so I don't live in Fantasyville. Fantasyville, how do I word this? It's nice in the moment. Does that make sense? Fantasyville is nice in the moment, but your short-term and long-term goals are never going to be completed as long as you are living in that fantasy, and your judgment calls are not going to be good. In fact, they're going to be quite bad. That's what we're seeing here, where this union, I'm surprised they allowed $10 million worth of stuff to happen with this, because you need to catch it early, and the way you do that is you have two different types of audits, internal and external. We've talked about that in the past. It's very important that you have an internal and external, and you get it from both sides, the American side and the Canadian side on this. And so that's why you do an audit. It's not meant to be a slap in the face. It's actually not. It's actually a good thing to do, so that way you know what your books are, and you know what needs to be balanced, and you know where the funds are going. If I had to guess, I bet this president probably was looking at a report and said, wait a second, why is this being shuffled around? Why am I just now hearing about this? And I bet you that's why they did not appoint a Canadian to the position of Secretary Treasurer, because if you think about a Secretary Treasurer, think about that second word, treasurer. The Treasury holds all the money, is in charge of the money, and they can move stuff around and it may or may not be known. That's why a Canadian was not put in that position. It's not blatantly stated why, but if we read between the lines and we understand what it means to live in Fantasyville and Realville, Realville does things correctly or as much as possible, and Realville acknowledges there's a problem but wants to correct the problem. Fantasyville just wants to live on cloud 9 or whatever number it is all the time. It's like every day is Vegas day. Well, that's a lie. That's not true. It's one thing to have fun with your own money. It's completely different to misappropriate and misuse someone else's money. Completely different. And I think that's what happened here. Do I work for these people? No. Do I have access to this information? No. I'm just going off of what I'm seeing and what I know from looking at previous unions and also from my background of working as an auditor and a staff accountant. It's very easy to see through these things and realize, hey, there's a reason why basically they had a change in management. It's very important that when you're dealing with millions of dollars, if not everything is on the up and up, then something's got to change. And that's why I get concerned whenever monies are being sent elsewhere, when they need to stay in America. It would be no different if this was happening in Canada and the Americans were getting all this money. I would say, hey, even though I'm American, if these are a bunch of Canadian dollars, they need to stay in Canada. We should not be misappropriating funds either way. It doesn't matter who it is. You need to do stuff on the up and up, always. Otherwise, you're in for some very turbulent times, and why bring that on yourself? It's not worth it. But anyway, finishing up with this article, it says, Goodwin, the president, proposed raising the per capita dues of Canadian OPEIU members by $2 per member per month, which accounting for the then low Canadian dollar would mean Canadians were paying more in dues than their American counterparts. Spoiled, rotten little kid, get over it. Acknowledge the fact that your currency is probably the problem as well. So just because your currency has a problem, that doesn't mean that you still shouldn't be held accountable for stuff that's happening. Goes on to say on June 20th, 2004, the Canadian locals voted 74% to 26% to form their own autonomous union under the umbrella of the international OPEIU Canadian delegates to the International Convention. And then they met in Bal Harbour, Florida, and then withdrew from the proceedings and formed their own national union, the Canadian Office and Professional Employees Union, COPE, and in Quebec, whatever that long French phrase is. But anyway, so I find it funny that they have a convention in Florida. They love the high life too. You know, what's interesting is that, socialists claim to really care about people. They don't. They're just as selfish as anybody else. They love palm trees just as much as anybody else. They love alcohol just as much as anybody else. And guess what? They didn't come to Oklahoma or Kentucky or Tennessee to have their convention. They went to Florida. So obviously they have some fancy taste. They have a champagne taste on a beer budget. And considering that they don't have as high as a per capita as the United States, they have champagne taste on a lemonade budget. So they kind of need a little wake-up call there. But I do think it is good that the Canadians form their own union because they need to have autonomy within their union. I may not agree with every little thing, but I do think that if you want to get more bang for your buck, so to speak, then you need to be, how do I say this? You need to have management over your own money. And you need to only be utilizing your money, not somebody else's. And so I'm not surprised that when the Canadians of this union were going to be basically forced to pay this membership due if you want to be in this union, I'm not surprised that they went ahead and decided to leave. Like when I read the whole $10 million thing and that they were going to have to pay more per capita, per member or whatever, I was like, oh, they're leaving. They're leaving because guess what? The gravy train stopped. I always find it interesting whenever someone wants to go out on their own, they're basically growing up, They're not wearing little diapers anymore. They're not crawling. They're not going to act like a spoiled, rotten little kid. They're like, oh, I'm not going to just have a slush fund anymore. Well, I guess I should do things on my own. Good. That's what they should have been doing all along. That's what they should have been doing this entire time. Because just think about this entire time that they've been trying to, or they did get funds allocated to them. They basically were not doing everything they could have been doing to help their own union within their own country. That's the thing. When you rely on somebody else like that, when you can do it yourself, you're basically throwing away your hopes and your dreams, and you're not fulfilling your own personal destiny. And it's very important that you do fulfill your own destiny, because your destiny belongs to you. It doesn't belong to anybody else. It doesn't matter if you are in a union or not. Your destiny still belongs to you. So why sell out? Why be lazy? Why be a slacker? Because that's what that tells me. If they're just expecting all this money from the American side, gee, did they take a leaf out of the book of NATO or some of these other organizations that just use us for money? I tell you what, it just reminds me of these bullies that kids, of course these people weren't necessarily bullies, but it just reminds me of anyone that just keeps asking for a handout. A bully would shake you down and beat you up, and I don't think they did that, but it just kind of reminds me of these wimpy, whiny people that they never really own up to the fact that they have a life as well, and they need to start acting like an adult and basically get their bleep together. I'm trying to work on my language. Because it's better to be self-reliant as much as possible, not to the extreme, because we do need other people in our life. We are a society. We are a nation. But the thing is that you're not going to have very fulfilling fellowship with people if you don't take your role in society, if you don't grow up and just really take your place in society and understand what your personal role is in your society and within your country and within your organization, whatever that organization is. It's very important. I don't care if it's a parent-teacher conference, or if it's a soccer club, or maybe you're a lawyer and you're part of a legal association. Whatever you are a part of, whether it's white collar, blue collar, no collar, whatever. Maybe you're a model and you're very successful in Milan, Italy. Well, whatever organizations you are in, regardless of whether you're currently modeling or not, take ownership of your life and realize that, you're not just a model, you are so much more than that. Is modeling a really neat profession? Yes, I think it's wonderful. And you can make a lot of money and be very successful, but you're not just a piece of flesh. Does that make sense? Like, you're so much more than that. So join organizations that really, that they really promote your personal growth in the short term and the long term. Just be careful that it's not socialist, fascist, or communist, because they're very sneaky. They are very sneaky. So what I might do now that I'm thinking about this, I thought about this in the beginning of this podcast, is kind of set up or go over some, not rules, but go over, I guess kind of like, I say processes and protocols of what to look for when you're trying to join an organization, and how to avoid the pitfalls of joining bad ones, and what to look for, because a lot of this stuff is not obvious. Like, for example, no one wakes up one day and says, oh, I want to join a Nazi group. I want to join a neo-Nazi group because that's what I think I'm called to do. No one wakes up and thinks that way. What happens is the way they recruit, this is like with any kind of gang-related instance, they lure someone in. They dangle a little bit of bait and they slowly lure them in. It's the same way with these other bad organizations. And I'm not saying that this one's bad. It's not. I think it's actually really good. But I'm just saying in general, you have to realize that a lot of things are subtle. And then sometimes you don't know till you're knee deep in their problems, or you're just really unsure about what you joined, and then you wake up one day and go, what have I joined? What do I even stand for anymore? So I would think it would be best to avoid that stress. And plus also, your time is valuable. Because all time is valuable. So if your time is valuable, which it is, regardless of your profession, regardless of your sex, creed, religion, color, race, whatever the case may be. Your time is valuable. Use it wisely. So know that whatever you volunteer for or whatever you participate in, whatever you join, and whatever industry you work in, your time is valuable. And it's very important that whatever we put our energy into, that it's molding us into something better, not into something worse. Does that make sense? Because that's how I look at it, and that may seem really simple, but I like to keep things simple, especially for myself, just black and white, yes and no, because I've learned that if we allow things to get complicated, that it leads to the gray area. And it's in the gray area where a lot of bad stuff happens, and then that's when you kind of get into legal issues. And things like that can just pop up out of nowhere, and you think, whoa, what happened with this? Why is this happening? And how can I get out of it? How can I avoid it in the future? Things like that. So it's kind of one of those things, it matters who you associate with. It matters where you work. I was thinking it also matters who you marry. And another thing like that. Like, for example, that Greek guy, oh man. I don't think he knew what he was getting into. But for sure, I don't know how to word this, but it's kind of like I wish I had gotten his name, so that way I could have, tried to figure out if he actually became a citizen of the United States. Not that I would know how to confirm that or not, but usually when someone marries an American like that, they can get legal status. So, but anyway, kind of like a mail order bride. But anyway, or mail order groom in that particular instance. But anyway, so just be careful what you join and believe in something, that you want to believe in. And I mention that in close because you need to know in your heart and your soul, got the hiccups. It's important to know what you believe in, because if you don't know what you believe in, that's how you can be lured into following someone else and what they believe in. And you want to make sure that whatever you believe in is good and true, it's legal, it's moral, regardless of what it is, and that, how do I word this, that you know it's what you should be doing. Not just because it's what someone else is doing, or because they're super educated, or they're wealthy, or live in a great house. None of that really matters. Is it good that someone is successful? Yes. But there are millionaires that are crazy. There are millionaires that are socialists. There are millionaires that are communists. There are millionaires that are fascists. So just because someone has wealth and a yacht or all this stuff, that doesn't mean that they are the one that we should be listening to or following, because it could greatly deter our destiny and also stop it from coming to pass. Does that make sense? I hope so, because I don't know. I think it would be really bad if someone passed away and before they died, they realized they didn't fulfill what they should have fulfilled in their lifetime. I would think that that would be very distressing. And so I've always looked at as, regardless of what I do in my life, I want to make sure that it's what I want to do and that it's something that I'm called to do. And my faith dictates that. I don't know if everyone that's listening is Christian or not, but my faith very much dictates where I go, what I say, what I do, because God's law protects us. That's just how I live my life, and I don't say that to offend anybody, not by any means, because I know some people in the United States are super sensitive about religion right now, but it's one of those things that I think it's a good thing to be very aware of what you believe in and make sure that what you believe in is good and true. Because if it's good and true, then you will avoid the traps. You will avoid being tooken. And when I say tooken, there may be people from other countries listening to this. To be tooken means to be fooled. That's just a phrase that we use here in the United States. Like for example, if I go to a car dealership and I buy a vehicle and I overpay $10,000, which that wouldn't happen to me because I know the car industry, so if anything, I would get a way better deal. I would be paying $10,000 to $18,000 less than sticker value because I never pay retail. That's how good I am at that. But anyway, let's say, for example, in this particular case, I go to a car dealership and I overpay $10,000. I would get home and realize, I'm looking at this contract, I got tooken, I got fooled. I think it's hoodwinked or whatever the case may be. That's what it means to be tooken, is that you got fooled. Well, I would think that if you believe only in things that are good and true, then you won't get took and you won't get fooled. Or you will at least have a very low rate of that happening, because it will guide you towards better things, and then you will grow in wisdom, because that's how I look at my life, because I've definitely grown in that, I would say. And number one, I asked God to give me wisdom. Number two, I really had to take a step back from different situations of my life and just go, okay, is this something I should be a part of, or do I need to walk away? Because as Americans, sometimes it's very hard for us to walk away because we don't like to quit. We're not quitters. We don't like to fail. We're very driven people. And so to walk away from something, it almost feels like defeat. And I personally hate that. It just feels horrible. It just makes me cringe, because I just know how I am as an individual. But I've learned that sometimes you have to walk away from things that either A, are not meant to be, or B, are not healthy, and C, it's not where I'm supposed to be. It's not meant to be in my life. And I've learned that sometimes God tells us no. I look at it that way. Sometimes God tells us no so He can tell us yes later on. And I look at that, when I was younger, that really irritated me. But now that I'm older, I look at that as a blessing, because I know that was God protecting me. So, regardless of what you believe, this is just me talking from my personal experience and my faith walk and my journey. And I've just learned to not be offended when someone or something says no, or if something doesn't work out, and to not be irritated or frustrated, and just know that sometimes things don't work out for a reason. Sometimes they don't work out for a known reason at all. It might just be something completely random. But I've learned that there is always something good to do in your life, regardless of your situation, and that it really does matter who we associate with, what we do, where we go, because that kind of very much defines our life. And I would want you and everyone listening to have a good life, not a bad life. Just always go for a good life. But anyway, I will go ahead and end this podcast. So as usual, until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.